Time management is such an important subject. It won't just change your life, it is your life. So in this course, I'm going to look at how we can get more time for the important things, which means spending less time on the unimportant things using the only 5 ways that will then allow you to get more done. I'll show you how to get a whole extra month per year. And that's not just a month of the usual messy days full of emails and meetings and traffic jams. It's an extra month of pure, uninterrupted time. So, let's get started. Why bother to be good at managing your time? What's the point of being more efficient? Certainly, we'd all like more time so that we could get more done. But given that time is finite, why organise it better? Well, I think the answer to this is that it's the important things that we would like more time for. And therefore, the objective of time management is to maximise the time spent on important things. So the one point of being efficient is to use up less time on the unimportant things so that we have more time for the important things. So the game is to think about what's important and then find ways to spend more time on those important things. By the way, I would hope that there is some correlation between what you think is important and what your boss or your company thinks is important. If you disagree totally with them, then you're probably in the wrong job. Just a thought. And if saying that to you makes you suddenly realise, oh my God, he's right. What am I doing? I hate this job. And decide to leave and do something else. Have I done you a favour? Yes, I think I have. And have I done your company a favour too? Yes, I think so. Of course, your job can't be 100% brilliant and fun all the time, but it ought to be mostly something that you agree with. But importance is a subtle thing. If you don't spend time on the important things, you don't notice a problem immediately. You can neglect your health for a bit, ignore your self-development or training your staff for a bit, ignore even your customers for a bit, and get away with it. But of course, if you do neglect things like this, they'll catch up with you later. You'll pay the price of regret later. That's why your goals need to be things that you like doing, but also things that you want to achieve. So to start with, I'd like you to make a list of the areas of your life and the areas of your work that feel important to you. What would you like to spend more time on, and what do you want to achieve? Start with this list, and then we'll get more detail into it in the next section. If an activity moves you towards your goals, then it's important. And if it doesn't, then it's not important. It's as simple as that. If your goal is to win Wimbledon, then tennis practice is important. And if your company decides it wants to sell more to Mexico, then any potential customers you meet from Mexico have now become important. But remember that goals aren't just in the achieving category. They can also be enjoy-type goals too. If you love golf, then you're saying that golf is important to you. And the more time you can spend on it, the better. Even if you aren't trying to achieve a particular goal, you're just enjoying playing it. So if it doesn't contribute to either enjoy or achieve, then it's not important. And therefore, I want to spend the minimum time on it so that I can have more time for the things I do want to achieve or enjoy. So the question is, what do you want to enjoy and achieve at home? And what do you want to enjoy and achieve in your work? These are your goals in life. And these goals must be written down, specific and positive. Written down because having them in your head is a way of saying that you don't really want to commit to them, so you must write them down. Specific because the clearer they are, the better. Things like to get more exercise are not as good as to run 5K 3 times a week. And positive because your brain can't cope with a goal like to have less stress or to watch less TV. Much better for the stress reduction goal would be go for a walk every evening after work, or to feel good about your work, or to enjoy and look forward to your work. And in the case of the TV reduction goal, it would be better to set yourself the target of reading for an hour before putting the TV on, or to watch TV for 2 hours maximum and then switch it off. These are positive things that we can visualize, and therefore things that we can do. And there are 2 reasons why writing down your goals will make them happen. The first is that it's like setting your sat-nav, or GPS I think it's called in the US. When you put in a destination, you will get there. It might take you a bit longer if the weather or the traffic is against you, but even if you miss a turning, you'll still be heading in roughly the right direction. And it's the same if you set goals. Your subconscious will guide all the decisions that you make every day. And you'll spot and you'll take opportunities that other people will say were luck. And you'll be much more likely to get to that destination, or close to it. The other mechanism that makes goals happen is that the 2 vital qualities, self-discipline and assertiveness, both come from having clear goals. All time wasters come from either you, due to your lack of self-discipline, or from others, due to your lack of assertiveness. So it's vital to have these qualities. And if you've got clear goals, then you're not going to let other people or other things get in your way and distract you. So now I'd like you to get some paper and write probably the most important list you'll ever write in your life. I want you to write down your goals for home and for work, both enjoy and achieve for both places. And during or after you've written them, make sure that they are positive goals as well as specific. And then they will happen. When I was about 35, I shared an office with a guy who was 55. And one Monday morning he came in and he said, "Oh my God, Chris, I've just worked out that I've only got 800 weekends left." And if you do the maths, you'll see he was probably about right. Of course, it might be a few more than that, but then again, it might be much less than that. Sometimes people say to me, "I wish you'd never told me about that 800 weekends thing." But I think I'm doing you a favour by telling you this, because it gives you the opportunity to make maximum use of the weekends that you do have, however few or many there are. Even if you're 25 or 35, this still applies to you, because you don't want to waste your days away and then suddenly realise when you're 60 or 70 that you could have done so much more. So, if you got an email from God saying you have 803 weekends left, what would you do differently? Would you make a list of things you want to get done? Would you make a plan of how to get it all done in that time? Would you start saying no to everything that's not on your list and be more assertive about time wasters? Would you spend more time with loved ones maybe? Or maybe have more fun? Perhaps you'd stop worrying about all the small stuff and get on with the big things instead. Because you know what I'm going to say. Yes, you should be doing all those things anyway, even though you probably haven't had an email from God. And maximising the time spent on important things is the objective of time management. If you don't spend time on important things, you or your company will pay the price of regret. Not developing new products, not training your staff, not bringing in quality systems, not looking after existing customers, these will all lead to regret later on. So I'd like you to think about what's got to change. What are you going to say no to? What are you going to stop doing? What are the things that don't really deserve to be in your top 800 weekends? Let's think of it as your top 800 rather than your last 800. It's a bit nicer. You already have your list of goals from the previous section, but you might want to adjust that. Add more or take a few off until you're happy that those are your key priorities in life. And then the next step is to find ways to fit all these things into the reality of life, with all its messy, urgent hassles and distractions. And that's what we're going to look at in the next section. But first, I'd like you to make that list. What does priority mean? If something's a priority, how should you treat it differently from something that's not a priority? Well, originally priority meant how urgent it was. It's based on the word prior, which means doing something before something else, which is basically a measure of urgency. But recently priority has come to mean how important something is. My children are my number one priority. No, they aren't. They aren't urgent. You don't have to rush out of here right now and see them. However important they are probably not urgent. So the word priority has become a rather messy mixture of urgent and important, to the point where it's almost useless. In fact, next time someone says this job is a priority, you should ask them, do you mean it's urgent or do you mean it's important? Of course, they'll probably say both. And the answer to that is to ask, so do you want it straight away as a rush job, or do you want me to plan it in for later and do it properly? If you let them confuse importance and urgency, if you get confused between the two, then your time planning will be all wrong. You'll end up doing things in the wrong order and not allocating the right amount of time to the important things. If you think about it, these two things, urgency and importance, are not necessarily connected at all. Something can be important but not urgent, like planning your 10-year strategy. And something can be urgent but not important, like dealing with an interruption. The result of urgency should be when you do it, and the result of importance should be how long you spend on it. I'll just say that again, it's so important. The result of urgency should be when you do it, and the result of importance should be how long you spend on it. And I want to stress that importance isn't about whether you do it. There are lots of trivial things you have to do, like buying food. Of course, you have to do it, but the question is, do you want to spend lots of time on it? Just because ironing has to be done, surely that doesn't mean it's important. Filling up your car with petrol's the same. You have to do it, but spend the minimum time on it. Just get it done in the most efficient way. Now, one more example, buying Christmas presents. Is it urgent and is it important? Well, depending on when you view this video, it may or may not be urgent. And we can measure that urgency in days to go. It's a fact. It's the same for all of us. It's a fixed thing that comes from outside of us. And the urgency of buying those Christmas presents gradually increases for all of us as we approach the dreaded Christmas day. Importance, on the other hand, is completely different. First, it's a matter of opinion. It's different for all of us, depending on whether we care about it. Second, it comes from within us rather than from outside. And third, it doesn't change over time. Although the buying of presents gets more urgent as the weeks go by, it remains important or trivial according to our opinion, right up till the last moment. What are the urgent but trivial tasks that are taking up too much of your time? And what are the important things that you really should make some space for? So the key is to separate out importance and urgency in your mind. Things that are urgent are probably not important, so don't let them take up too much of your day. And things that are important are often not urgent, so there's a need to make sure they don't get ignored and put off and never done. My wife phoned me the other day when I was away working. It was the evening, and I was in a hotel about to watch my favourite TV show, and I could see the call coming in. My show was about to start. What to do? Maybe ignore the call? But what if it's a crisis happening back at home? Maybe take the call and try to get rid of her as quickly as possible before my programme starts. Maybe multitask and talk to her with the show on in the background. But that's the worst choice, because then I get a bad phone call and a bad TV experience. I decided to answer it and be honest. So I said, "Hi, is everything okay? And can I call you back in half an hour? My favourite programme's just coming on." How do you think that went? Well, not very well. "Oh, I see, I'm not as important as your stupid TV programme," she said. "Yes, you are," I said. "You are important. You're just not as urgent," which seemed to just make matters worse. But the point was that Instead of rushing the call, I wanted to phone her back later and have a nice long conversation with her, because importance is how long you spend on things, and of course she is important. But really, her call wasn't urgent. It made no difference when we talked during that evening, as long as we did. But you can see how easy it is to make her feel unimportant by saying she wasn't urgent. People always mix those things up in their mind. It's really hard not to get the two confused, but you must disentangle them if you're going to understand correct prioritization. So, to help you with thinking about importance, here are 4 tests for whether something is important or not. The first is, will it matter in 5 years? If not, then it's really not important. There's a great book called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and then in brackets it says, and everything is small stuff. My second test is, will you regret not doing more of it when you die? As you finally keel over, will you have time to think, if only I'd chaired more committees, or if only I'd done more vacuuming? Or will you be thinking, if only I'd spent more time surfing with my son? My third test is, would you miss it if it was gone? If your lawn no longer needed cutting, or if you no longer had to buy food to replenish your kitchen cupboards, or you could no longer watch football on TV, would you miss it? Would I miss my dog? Definitely yes. Would you miss my dog? I'm guessing the answer is probably no. So therefore, my dog isn't important to you. And that's fine. We all have our different opinions about what's important. Would you miss music? Some people wouldn't, and each to their own. These are great questions for thinking about importance. Finally, a version of the third question, my fourth one, is, would you press a magic button and have it done for you? Would you delegate going to the toilet if you could? Would you delegate walking the dog? Would you delegate reading bedtime stories to your kids? So, what are the things that really are important to you? Check back over your goals and make sure that they are all included in there somewhere. The difference between urgent and important was first described by Dwight Eisenhower back in the 1950s. In fact, he rather brilliantly said, I have 2 kinds of problems, the urgent and the important. The urgent ones are not important, and the important ones are never urgent. However, although I do agree with him that most urgent things aren't important, and vice versa, you can sometimes get things that are both important and urgent, and you can also get things that are neither. Here are the 4 combinations in box format, numbered 1 to 4. So we've got 4 types of tasks. 1 is crisis, 2 is hassle, 3 is progress, and 4 is necessary or perhaps unnecessary evils. So a quick look at the 4 boxes. First, you know when you're in box 1. Because it's a crisis and it's urgent, you have to drop everything and deal with it right away. And because it's important, you have to spend plenty of time on it and do it properly. Box 1 is a bad place to spend much time in, because although you're doing important things, you're doing them in a stressful way. And if you tend to get too many box 1s, there's a risk that you'll get 2 or 3 at once, and then you're sunk. So ideally, you'd keep box 1 to 10% of your day maximum. Next, there's box 2, which I call the hassle box. Do you ever have a day where you work really hard all day, busy, 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 and then as you drive home, you find yourself thinking, where did that day go? I worked really hard all day, but I've got nothing to show for it. That unsatisfactory feeling is because you spent all day in box 2. Of course, we do have to spend a certain amount of time in box 2. In fact, I think it might be the biggest box most days. But the objective is to reduce the time spent in box 2 so that we can get more time in box 3. Box 3 is where we find the things that are important, that move you towards your goals, the things that you should plan and do ahead of time. So box 3 is absolutely the essence of time management, and we must find ways to spend more time in this box. Finally, there's box 4, often called the don't do it box in the textbooks. This might, for example, be ironing underpants. I hope we can agree that that doesn't need to be done. But I don't entirely agree with the books on this one, because I think half of box 4 does need to be done. If you take ironing shirts, for example, or any housework for that matter, it does need to be done. The same with filing at work. But because it's not urgent, you can plan when you do it. And because it's not important, you should do it in the minimum time. So, those are the 4 boxes, and everything in your life is going to be in these boxes, because everything must be either urgent or not, and either important or not. So, I'd like you to think about what you have in your 4 boxes. What are the crises that you get in box 1 that you really should work on preventing? What are your main box 2 hassles that you should be reducing the time on? What are the box 3s that you'd like to spend more time on or ought to spend more time on? And are there any 4s that you can either get rid of or do in less time? I've made you a template that you can download and fill in if that helps, but one way or the other, I'd like you to think a little bit about these questions now. I want to have a closer look at box 3, because if you think about it, everything that will make any difference to your life, your future, or the successful future of your company will be in box 3. Anything that will make a difference to the future will be something important and probably something that's not immediately urgent. Everything from healthy eating and exercise right through to having a 10-year strategy. They're all important but not urgent, so they're in box 3. And if you don't deal with these box 3 tasks, then sooner or later you'll find yourself in box 1, the crisis box. If box 1 is already more than about 10%, then the key is to tackle the source of the crises. And if you think about it, there's only one place that crises come from, and that's box 3. Everything is important, but not yet urgent, before it becomes a crisis. Every crisis starts out life in box 3, and because you didn't spend the box 3 time on planning or preparing or training or quality systems or communication or recruiting the right people, etc., then later you find yourself with a crisis. So the first thing to do is to think, what is the box 3 thing that I need to do more of to prevent these crises coming through? How can I prevent a repeat of this? If you think about it, everything management should be doing is to be found in box 3. And these management activities mainly fall into 3 categories: vision, systems, and people. Setting the vision for the future, that's definitely important and is never urgent until you realise you've been going in the wrong direction, it's too late. Setting up systems and improving systems so nothing falls down the cracks, and asking why things go wrong so you can improve the systems for next time, that's definitely a box 3 activity. And then making sure you've got the right people and that they're trained and motivated and all doing the right things, that's also really important. But again, not urgent until you realise probably too late that you've neglected it. So everything that matters is in box 3. If you were to look back in 5 years' time, and your company is now twice the size and 3 times more profitable, how did you get there? It will be because of the things you did in box 3 during that time. Remember that box 3 isn't just planning, it's doing as well. Doing things ahead of time, getting ahead of the game. So the objective of this course is to make you into a box 3 person and to help you to get your company to be a box 3 company, where everything is done ahead of time, with the majority of time allocated to the most important things. Of course, sometimes the box 3 task is in someone else's box 3, and it sits on your boss's desk or your customer's desk, important, but with them ignoring it, until eventually it becomes a crisis, and then they dump it onto you as a box 1. Thanks very much for that. But even then, there are things you can do to stop the ones happening. If you think about the fire brigade, they have putting out burning buildings in box 1. And it's never their fault that the building is on fire. It always starts with someone else. But even so, there are 2 things that they can do to reduce the number of box 1s. They can do prevention, where they give talks to schools and make sure that buildings are built correctly and have fire escapes, etc. And they can also prepare systems so that they can react extra quickly if there is a fire. They practice going down their pole, everyone is trained, the vehicles are ready to go, etc. So in your work, it's the same. You can help colleagues and customers avoid problems, working with them to avoid repeats, and you can be ready to deal with any problems that do come up. So what are the box threes that you have at the moment that you really should be spending more time on? Are there any that you're putting off or not giving enough attention to? Can you schedule some of them into your diary for this coming week? And if you can't finish them in one go, at least make a start on them this week. I showed Eisenhower's 4-box matrix of important tasks and urgent tasks to a managing director on a course once. And he said, "I love it. I'm going to divide my desk into 4 quadrants, and when papers come in, I'm going to put them in the right places." And I was thinking, well, I'm glad he likes it, but that wasn't what I was saying, really. I don't think you should spend time agonising over, is it a 1 or a 2? But instead, the model is really about the concept of box 3, doing tasks that are important before they become urgent. Be a box 3 person working in a box 3 organisation, and find ways to spend more time in box 3. Realise that urgent things are only 2s, they aren't really important. And work out how to spend as little time as possible in box 1, because if you're in there, you've failed. That's what the model's about, understanding the objectives of time management. And realising that box 1 looks better than box 3, but it isn't. Rushing around, being late for meetings, may look macho and exciting, but it's really just a sign of bad management. And sitting at your desk, thinking, may look as if you don't have enough to do, but in fact it means you're ahead of the game, and that's great. But what about the argument that there's more to life than planning and getting ahead of the game? What about fun? Someone once accused me of putting my whole life into boxes and said he thought that was a bit sad. "You do all this planning, and what about just having some fun for a change?" he said. I thought to myself, good point. I think I need to analyse fun. So, which box do you think fun is in? Well, it's important, that's for sure. And it's probably not urgent. I must have fun now. So it's in box 3 then, which I'm pleased about, because I've been saying that everything that matters is in box 3. For example, I sometimes meet up with friends and have a meal out in an Indian restaurant, and it's always great. And everyone always says, we should do this more often, but somehow we just don't get around to organising it. A little bit more box 3 planning time would increase the enjoyment of all of our lives. So box 3 can make you happier. It's not just about work and results. Fun could be in box 1 as well. Take the moment while it's there. Say your 4-year-old son wants to play football. You can't say, well, I'm a bit busy on my emails right now, but I can book you in at 7:30 for 10 minutes. And fun can be in box 2, making the most of chores, and in box 4, slobbing out on the sofa eating donuts and watching a rubbish film on TV. But really, mainly, it's in box 3. Relaxing and doing the things that you enjoy is important. So my model isn't against fun, it's pro-fun, both in terms of enjoying all of the boxes where possible, and in terms of spending the maximum time in box 3. So, as well as planning and thinking, do you get enough time in box 3 doing the things that you want to do? What would you like to spend more time on that might require a bit of planning ahead in order to make it happen? Is working longer hours a good idea? Well, if you think about it, there are only 2 ways you can get more time for the important things at work. Either to extend the box down into your personal life and work longer hours, or to take the time from the other boxes. And to get more box 3 in your life generally, there is no extension option. So you have to get the time from the other boxes. And that's the option I'm going to explore with you in detail in another video. But just to get the working longer hours option out of the way first, let's have a quick look at that now. If working longer hours meant that you could produce more output and profit for your company, but at a cost to your personal life, I'd have a bit of a dilemma on whether to recommend it, since your company might be paying for you to watch this video. But in fact, I have no such dilemma, because working longer hours doesn't work. There's been lots of research that shows that people who work longer hours on a regular basis, whether they're creative types or managers or shop floor workers, they don't achieve any more than people who work normal hours. Of course, if you stay on late once, you'll get more done. And indeed, you should stay on late occasionally if you need to. It would be quite disloyal to say, nope, I always go home at 5 and I'm not going to help out with the company crisis. See you tomorrow, guys. But the point is that if you regularly work long hours, you won't get any more done. It's as if you only have a certain amount of work within you. And if you work a longer day, you just get into the habit of pacing yourself and doing the same amount of work in a longer time. Maybe you let interruptions happen thinking, well, it doesn't really matter because I can finish this evening when everything's quiet. Or maybe you sit in that boring meeting and you say nothing, thinking, not to worry, I can take that report home with me or come in at the weekend. But if you were keeping to your correct hours, you'd say no to that interruption, or you'd walk out of that meeting. Our self-discipline gets worse if we have the safety net of longer hours. And sometimes there's pressure from our bosses to work longer hours because they do, or because the easiest way to measure someone is the hours they work instead of what they achieve. But somehow you have to find a way to resist this, because longer hours achieve nothing, and they're bad for you. They eat into your personal time, and so you have less time to recharge your batteries for the next day. Just think, if you only have 2 hours of discretionary time at home in the evening, that means if you stay on late for an hour, you've halved your life outside work that day. So the only viable choice is reducing the other boxes, and that's what we will look at next. But first, what's your working day like? Have you slipped into a habit of working longer hours? Remember, it's okay to stay on late every now and then, but if it's becoming a habit, then you need to do something about it. So we've seen that if you think about the importance and the urgency of the things you want to do, all your results come from the time spent in box 3 of Eisenhower's template, and you can find a copy of this in the exercise files. And therefore, the objective of time management is to spend as much time as possible in box 3. But how can we do this? Having ruled out working longer hours on a regular basis, the only way to increase box 3 is to reduce the time spent in the other 3 boxes, mainly box 2. We have to focus on box 2, the urgent stuff, because you can't reduce box 1. Sorry, I can't help you with that crisis, I'm afraid, because I'm planning today. You have to deal with box 1 when it comes up. And there's probably not much to be saved out of box 4. It's quite small for most people anyway these days. So box 2 is the one to reduce. Have a look at these figures. Suppose you're spending 20% of your day in box 1, which is a bit much, but not terrible. 60% of your day is in box 2, which is a lot, but normal. 15% is in box 4, on either things that you shouldn't be doing at all or things that are boring routines that have to be done, like filing. That leaves just 5% in box 3. Maybe half an hour of each day to think and plan. Is that about what you get? I know I've done jobs where I've had much less even than that. Anyway, let's say those are the numbers, and you resist the temptation to add just 5% to your day in order to double your box 3 time. What if you could reduce box 2 from 60 to 50% by the methods I'm going to come to next, say by delegating a bit more or having better systems? That would give you 10% more to add to box 3. You could have 15% in box 3 instead of 5%. 3 times as much. And with that extra time to plan and improve methods and train people, you could probably reduce the crisis box from, say, 20% to 15%. You'll never get rid of it because of customers, much as we love them, which would give you another 5% in box 3. And maybe by thinking and planning, you could also find ways to reduce box 4 from 15% to 10%, taking your total box 3 percentage up to 25%, 5 times as much as you started with. You'll get 5 times as much done. You're moving towards your goals of enjoy and achieve 5 times as powerfully. And this is why some people get so much more done than others. They're just a little bit more ruthless about reducing boxes 2 and 4, so they get less box 1 and a lot more box 3 than most people. That's why we have to find ways to reduce box 2, which I'm coming to next. But first, I just want you to do 3 little jobs for me. First, box 3 awareness. Write down what percentages you think you spend on average in the 4 boxes. And tomorrow, see how much time you do actually get in box 3. And don't feel bad about calmly thinking. Don't feel bad about being briefly away from crisis and hassle. Feel proud to be in box 3 for a bit. Also, second, I want you to start a log of when you leave work. And if it's regularly later than, say, 6 p.m, try to push it back to earlier than 6 and nearer to 5 if that's your official finish time. And third, stop taking work home. It's okay to check your emails out of hours if you need to, but don't take big pieces of work home to do. That's a sign that your work environment isn't good enough, or you're failing to fit your work into your working day. The first way that you can reduce the time you're spending on unimportant things and therefore get more important stuff done instead is to say no to those unimportant things. And I think, particularly in your personal life, this is a brilliant option. I had someone on a training course once who said the biggest thing he wanted to get from the course was to get out of darts. I asked him, What do you mean exactly? And he said, well, I'm very good at darts, and I play for 3 teams, and each team has 1 match a week and also practices once a week. So I'm playing darts 6 nights a week, and I'm bored with darts. What should I do? Well, as you can imagine, I suggested that he picked one of the teams and say to them, sorry guys, I can't get the time anymore, so I'm going to have to quit as soon as you can find someone else. That's what I suggested. And then guess what he said? Ooh, I can't do that. They need me. I'm the best player. I run the accounts and the diary. And you can probably also guess what I then said. Tough. It's your life. You don't have to spend it doing something you don't want to do. You've probably only got 800 weeks left, so don't use them all up playing darts if you don't want to. So why didn't he want to say no to the darts guys? Perhaps he wasn't assertive enough to confront them. Or maybe he liked being needed. Or maybe he would have felt guilty letting them down. But let's just think about that for a minute. Would it be selfish of him to walk out on the darts team? I think if you define selfish as looking after your own life, then yes, it would be selfish. But if you think of selfish as a bad thing, which it usually is assumed to be, then I don't think he was selfish in a bad way. In fact, maybe the team were being selfish, making him play when he didn't want to. Maybe whenever you feel pressure to do something you don't want to do, there is somebody else being selfish, putting that pressure on you. Now, of course the darts team would find someone else, and they'd be fine. They probably wouldn't even miss him. But what if they did? What if him leaving was going to ruin their lives? Well, there's a thing called the utility theory of happiness, which says that ideally you would maximize the happiness of the whole system. So if his small gain by leaving is going to be outweighed by their grief at losing him, then maybe he should stay. It's okay to look after yourself, but not if it costs other people a significant amount. Recently, my wife and I were invited to a wedding in Scotland, which is about 8 hours' drive from where I live. It was the wedding of a distant cousin of hers who we don't really know at all. And I was thinking, several days of travel, hundreds of pounds of cost. I know Scotland is romantic and we'll get free cake, but I don't really want to go. I've only got 800 weekends left, and spending one of them on a stranger's wedding isn't very high on my list. So I asked my wife, do you want to go to this wedding? Not really, she said, but I think we ought to. Anyway, I persuaded her out of it, and we didn't go. And did we ruin their wedding day? No, I bet they didn't even notice. In fact, it probably meant they could invite some of their friends instead of those miserable relatives from down south. If not going would have ruined their wedding, then we should have gone. But that wasn't the case. A whole extra weekend, 801 weekends. Thank you very much. Now that was a whole weekend, but imagine if you just said no to the occasional thing, just 1 hour per week of saying no. That would add up to 52 hours a year, which is at least a whole working week. Imagine a whole week of pure, uninterrupted time, not one of your current rubbish weeks full of interruptions and phone calls and emails and meetings, but a week of pure time. Wow, that would be useful, wouldn't it? You could get loads done. In fact, I suspect you'd be bored after the first couple of days. It's a lot of time. So, you don't have to become a miserable, unhelpful person who says no to everything. Just occasionally, just an hour a week would be great. So, have a think now about some things that you could say no to, that you'd like to say no to, or that you ought to say no to. So we've seen that saying no is definitely an option in your personal life. In fact, it should be the first thing you consider when confronted with something you don't want to do. But what about saying no at work? Is that allowed? Well, I used to say maybe to colleagues, but you can't really say no to bosses or customers. And I still think it's a bad idea to say no to your boss. I've got some other tactics for bosses coming up later. But with customers, I think it is okay to say no sometimes. What would happen if you never said no to a customer? Whatever they want, they can have. I think they'd ask for more and more, and they'd run you ragged. You'd either collapse with stress, or your company would make a loss, or at the very least, you'd fail to keep your promises. So the answer is no. Customers can't always have everything they want. However, I think that generally, option 2, which is coming up next, to negotiate, is a better option with customers. Charge them extra, and then it's worth doing what they want. The same with bosses. Negotiate rather than say no. And I'll give you some tips for that in a minute. But just going back to that point, that if you don't say no, there is a risk that you'll fail to keep your promises to everyone. I think any sensible customer or boss would rather that you said no than that you said yes and then didn't do something. I think saying yes and not doing something is a big crime. It's completely unacceptable, and you should never do it. It should be one of the top rules of your company that are explained to new recruits on day one. In this company, we don't steal stuff, we don't punch people, and we don't say yes and then not keep our promises. If everyone kept their promises, wouldn't life be much simpler? If people don't keep their promises, you have to waste time checking on them, and that's such a waste. If I have to spend, say, an hour a week checking on someone, they've stolen, effectively, an hour a week from me every year of my life, which is unacceptable. And I would tell them this. I don't have time to waste checking on them, so I expect them to be honest with me. If they can't do it, they must say so. And of course, if people don't keep their promises, it will affect customers too, and you don't want that. Put the other way around. If your company always keeps its promises to customers on every single small detail, 100% reliable, the customers will love that. And it'll put you above 90% of your competitors straight away. It's one of my rules in my work that I always do what I promise to do. And I think it makes me much easier to work with than most people. And interestingly, the flip side is that it forces me to say no if I can't do something. Because if I say yes, then I have to do it. So I live in a simple world where everything is either going to be done or it's not. And it feels good to live in that world. So as a manager, the flip side of people having to keep their promises, if they say yes, is that if they can't do something, they have to be allowed to say no. A can-do culture is all very well, but it must never turn into a say we'll do it and then fail to do it culture. Bosses have to allow people to say no, and individuals must never say yes and not do something. And if they do say yes, perhaps in a meeting, and they then realise later that they can't do it after all, they must come back and say, sorry, but I can't do it after all. Never leave it in that limbo land of they think they're going to get it, but they aren't. It's bad for bosses and customers, who might not notice every time, but 1 time in 10 they will notice, and then it will disturb them massively, and they'll never trust you again. It's bad for the organisation too. Wouldn't life be simple if everyone kept their promises? And that's the dream to aim for and push for. And perhaps biggest of all, it's bad for you. It's really only one up from lying. And do you want to be that sort of person? I know I don't. So, to conclude this first of the 5 options, I'd like you to think about saying no to just 1 hour a week of something. What is a regular thing in your life, like the darts, that you could cut, that you'd actually quite like to cut? What are the situations where you should really say no? Who are the people to whom you find it hard to say no, but you should? Have you recently agreed to something, perhaps under pressure, where you could go back and say you've realised you can't do it after all? Say no to just 1 hour a week from now on, and you'll get a whole extra week per year. The second of the 5 options for reducing the time spent on unimportant things in order to get more important stuff done is to negotiate. This is similar to saying no because it's a kind of partial no. If you think about your day as a box with lots of stuff, mostly unimportant stuff, coming in, and also lots of stuff getting done, and maybe you're just keeping up, or maybe the box is filling up more and more, these first 2 options, saying no and negotiating, are about letting less in. And that's got to be your first line of defence. And for bosses and customers, where saying no is often not an option, negotiating is probably your best option. You can negotiate in lots of ways. And here are 4 ideas for how you might negotiate with people over your time. Number 1 is to negotiate over when you do it. This doesn't save you time in total, although it might give you a reduction in the number of requests if you don't always do things straight away for people. But mainly, it gives you more choice over how you organise your time. I can do it, but not till Tuesday. Would that be okay? Is a great way to make the point that your time is valuable and that they can't just have it whenever they want it. In fact, there is an argument for saying that even if you can do it right away, it might still be better, at least sometimes, to make them wait for it, to keep them trained to respect your time. And even better than I can't do it till Tuesday is when do you need it by? Because you never know, they might say Thursday, which would be good. And if they say Monday, you could still say, oh, I can't do it till Tuesday, I'm afraid. So you've lost nothing by asking them to open first. My second negotiable factor is how long you spend on it. Your time is valuable. It's a resource like anything else. And other people have to ask for it and negotiate for it. They can't just take as much as they like. So you can say, I'm a bit tied up just at the moment, but I've got about 10 minutes now, if that would be enough. Negotiating over how long they get works well in conjunction with the first one, when they get it. In fact, my starting position is that you can't have lots of my time right now. You can either have a bit now, or if you want more, you'll have to wait for when I can fit you in. So you could say, I'm a bit tied up just at the moment, but I've got about 10 minutes now, if that would be enough. Otherwise, I've got more time this afternoon. Or the other way round, I can do it this afternoon. Unless you only need 5 minutes, I could do that now. Giving them the choice makes you sound eminently reasonable, even though you're giving them a choice between two non-ideal options for them. And I think you are being eminently reasonable. How can they assume that whatever you are doing is not as important as what they want, and that they can therefore immediately have a large chunk of your time? The third negotiable is where. You might say, I'd really like to meet, but I've got a rather horrible week. Would it be okay if you came here for the meeting this time? Maybe this will save you half an hour each way. That's an hour saved, just like that. The fourth negotiating tactic is to get them to do some of it. So you're only offering to do part of it. For example, if you could supply it to me in spreadsheet format, then I could have a look at it. Or if you could prepare the slides for me, then I could present it to the customer. They'd have to be quite unreasonable to reject this and ask you to do all of it without any help from them. There's a negotiating principle which says, if you don't ask, you don't get. And often it's as easy as just asking, would you mind phoning him and setting up a time for the meeting? And they say yes, and there you are. You've just saved another 15 minutes. And again, just to stress, I'm not wanting you to become a bad team player, not doing your share, but at least make sure that the others do their share. So I'd like you to think now about what type of situations you could negotiate over, both in your personal life and at work. What are the things that you would like to reduce, the things that you can't entirely say no to, but you could maybe get rid of part of? Maybe you can send an email right now, negotiating away part of a task. Or at least get ready for when you next see that person, so that you know what you're going to say. Good luck. I've been thinking about ways to negotiate over how much of your time you let other people have. And I covered 4 suggestions in the previous video, and I've got 3 more thoughts for you now. First is that you might be able to get something back in return. In the case of a customer who's requesting a bit more work than you originally agreed, you might be asking for money in return. We can do it, but it's harder than it appears. It'll take Fred a couple of days, so we'd have to make a small extra charge for that. Sometimes customers appreciate things more if they have to pay for them. And it does also stop the rot. If you do it for free, they'll probably ask for more and more in the future. Of course, it doesn't have to be money. You can say that if they order 10, then you could write the extra documentation. Or if they will hold the stock for you, or if they arrange the transport, or if they lend you an extra person to help, it would make it possible for you to do it. It's the same with colleagues and bosses. Can you get something back in return, something which will save you time in another area? If you can go to the daily or the weekly progress meeting for me, then I'll have a bit of extra time to do this job for you. My second suggestion is a variation of when, but this time using a list. And I think it's so good it deserves its own place on this list of negotiating strategies. The idea is that you have a list of the jobs you're doing for your boss. And when they bring you another one, you can ask where they want it on the list. Or, better, and showing a bit more initiative, you can say, I've got a couple of other really urgent jobs for you on my list here. So I think it should go in as number 3, so you'll get it on Thursday. Would that be okay? And if they want it right away, you can say, okay then, but as long as you know, you won't get number 2 on the list until Wednesday. I think most bosses will feel good about you being organised enough to have a list, and being able to see what they're going to get when. Only a foolish boss would say, I don't care about your list, I want everything right away. Though bosses like this do exist, I'm not denying that. And this works even when you've got 2 or 3 bosses. In fact, it's probably essential when you have more than one boss. You can say that you've already scheduled to do a job for boss A, so boss B will have to wait until tomorrow, unless they want to have a chat with boss A and get it changed. After all, it's reasonable to want to keep your promise to boss A, isn't it? Finally, there's a simpler version of the list, which is a simple choice of A or B. I can either do A or B for you, but I can't fit both in today. Which one do you want? It's reasonable to ask, in fact, helpful to let them have the choice rather than making assumptions. But it does make the point that you can't do everything. I think you could even use this with customers. You've got to do both, but it's fine to say which one do you want first, because we can do one of them today, but the other one won't be ready until next week. So those are my suggestions for option 2 of the 5 choices, negotiating. Remember that as with all of these 5 ways to control your time, you can't use just one of them all the time. Not everything is negotiable, and it will become very tiresome if you negotiated over everything. Pass the salt, could you? Oh, you'll have to make it worth my while. But all we're looking for is 1 hour a week, because that's another week per year. So probably just one negotiation a week would be enough to get you a whole extra week of time per year. So I'd like you to think now about whether you could use any of my 7 negotiating strategies, either in your personal life or at work. We've just covered getting something back in return, getting them to agree the priorities on a list, and getting them to choose one of 2. And in the other video on this topic, we covered negotiating over when you do it, how long you spend on it, where you do it, and whether they could do some of it for you. Which of these are you going to try first? Now, the third option for reducing the time you spend on unimportant things so that you can get more time for the important things is to delegate more. For some people watching this video, this will be a huge option. If you have 45 people working for you and you delegate 1 more hour to each of them, you could in theory delegate everything you do. You'd have your whole week free for thinking up new strategies and new products and planning the longer term big picture. And even if you only have 5 people working for you, if you gave them just 1 more hour a week of your work to do each, you'd save 5 hours a week, which is 5 weeks per year. A whole month per year. But what about the people watching this video who don't have anyone reporting to them? Is delegation still an option? Well, yes, I think it is. You can pay people to do things for you. At home, you can get your children to do some of the household tasks, maybe. And at work, you can sometimes delegate things to your colleagues, or maybe even to your boss. Remember, we're only looking for an hour per week to gain a week per year. In the case of colleagues, you should try to be a good team player and to do your share. But if someone else is better at a task than you are, then it makes sense for them to do it. And if you're very short of time, it might be better for them to do it this time. So I think delegation is always an option. I recently realised that it's completely stupid for me to spend a whole day cutting my hedge when I can get a guy to do it for $30. Surely a day of my life is worth more than $30, especially if, at age 55, I might only have 800 weekends left. So, if you're a manager with a team, delegation is probably the best of my 5 options. And I would say that thinking back to when I was a manager, it's probably my biggest regret. I don't think I was terrible as a delegator, but I could have been better at it. I could have done more. I think it's possibly the number 1 skill a boss needs to master. And if a manager says they're too busy, it's the first thing I'd look at. Do you sometimes answer quick questions and do small, fun tasks that you could really delegate? Could you set up a system or designate a person who could do those tasks? From now on, everything that comes to you, imagine I'm there, judging you, saying, you could have delegated that. And tell the person that they don't need to come to you, they can make the decision for themselves. Set up training if necessary, set up systems, and make it so that you delegate as much unimportant stuff as you can. If you can't leave the office for a week without phone calls and emails asking you for trivial information and decisions, then you're not a good enough delegator. So, how are you going to become a better delegator? And what specific tasks are you going to give to which specific people, starting now? If a manager tells me they have a problem with not enough time, the first thing I'd look at is whether they delegate enough. I think it's one of the most important management skills. It's where the biggest and easiest time gains can be found, and yet most bosses don't delegate enough. Why is this? Well, I think there are 5 main reasons, and all of them are false. Number 1, my people are too busy. Well, they aren't going to be sitting around doing nothing when you, the boss, are around, are they? And anyway, the work will always expand to fill the time available. They'll either do it better than it needs to be done, or they will become less efficient until the work has filled the day. Number 2, I can do it better than them. And yes, in your mind, your way will always be better than theirs. But is it really? And even if they do it at 90% of your standard, does it matter? Clearly, if they're at 20%, they're not ready. But if they're at 80 or 90%, give it to them. Number 3, it's fun and I like doing it myself. Well, I'm afraid being a manager isn't about fun. Life is, though, and I would concede that in your personal life, if you love, for example, cutting your hedge or cleaning your house, then don't delegate it, as long as you realise that everything replaces something else. So you're missing out on seeing your mum or your kids or reading great literature or exercise because you haven't delegated the cleaning. And clearly that's not sensible. Number 4, it takes too long to explain it. Well, I think we know the answer to this. It takes time the first time, but after that, it pays back forever. And finally, there was number 5, fear of it going wrong. If you monitor every now and then, or check it before it's finally sent to the customer, then it can't go wrong, can it? People are capable of much more than you think if you give them a chance and delegate to them. Overcome your fear of it going wrong. Ignore your belief that you're better than them and try delegating more and more to them. Ask yourself, what if I was out for a few months? Who would do each thing that I currently do? And then, rather than just leaving them to it, give them the work, but be there to catch them if they fall. Apart from saving you time, delegating has lots of other benefits. Your team gets to learn new things and have the nice feeling of achieving challenges. You get more people to learn how to do each task, so that if a key person is too busy or even leaves your business, then the job can still be done. And it allows you to get promoted more easily because you're no longer indispensable. Plus, they might do it better than you. You have to admit that that's a possibility. They do the job better, and you still get the credit because you've built a great team. So, are you a bit prone to any of these thought processes, particularly worrying that your people won't be good enough or worrying that they're too busy? Why not try delegating a bit more to them right away and see what happens? I bet they'll manage to fit it in, and I bet the quality of their work will surprise and impress you. The 4th way to get more done by spending less time on unimportant things is to have better systems. And I don't mean computer systems necessarily, just the way you work and the way the people around you work. I bet you waste an hour a week looking for stuff or doing things twice, putting right mistakes and doing trivial, annoying things which keep repeating every week and which are basically a waste of you. Anything that repeats is a waste of you. Anything that repeats is a sign that you need a system for it, or a better system for it. I'll give you a quick example. I used to pack for a few days away doing training courses around the country, and I would go around the house rounding up my iPhone charger and a fleece in case it was cold, and my toothbrush from upstairs, and all the other things I might need. But I quite often forgot something. So I decided to make a checklist of what to pack. Is that sensible or sad? I did laminate it, but apart from that, I think it's pretty sensible. So then I noticed that I was repeating the task of going round the house with my little list. So I set up a better system and I made a travel bag. I bought a second phone charger and a second toothbrush, etc., so I could just take the bag and go. This only saved a few minutes each time, but it all adds up, and also it's less stress. Sensible or sad? Sensible, I'm sure you'll agree. But then I noticed that sometimes the kids or wife had taken my memory stick or my can of Coke or the headache pills from my bag, and that I occasionally left my phone charger behind in a hotel, or the shampoo was left in the shower. And I'd get to the next place and be rummaging in my bag for something that wasn't actually there. So now I've made my travel bag version 2.0, which has lots of little compartments, so I can get straight to whatever I need without any rummaging. And if something is missing, I can immediately see that it's not there. So before I set off, I can see that I've got everything I need. Sensible or sad? I'll let you decide. So, again, it's only a small time saving, but less stress, and it works for me. Typical repeating problem areas might be finding things on your desk or in your office, finding stuff on your computer, forgetting things because you didn't write them down, having problems with slow or unreliable computers and printers, not knowing how to get the best from your computer, and also having problems with slow or unreliable people. Then there's putting things off, or spending too long on one thing because you're avoiding another, or having to do something twice because you didn't do it right the first time. And of course, customers. Do you waste time dealing with problems from customers that are the same every time, when maybe you could get to the bottom of the deeper cause behind the problems? You might even have a boss who wastes some of your time because you don't have an efficient way of working together. Maybe they keep checking on you, or they ask you and other people for the same thing, or they keep changing the priorities of the tasks you're working on for them, or they leave things till the last minute before they ask you for them. It's all about having an efficient system of working with everyone and everything. Systems can easily save you an hour a week, another week per year. And I'd like you to think about your systems. What do you have that repeats? What are the areas where you waste time due to inefficient ways of working? Probably the world expert on systems, David Allen, has a brilliant course that I'd recommend you to look at. His Getting Things Done videos give a wonderful, structured approach to being organised. You can also check out my courses on productivity. So that's your next step. Watch those courses with a notebook ready and make a list of ideas for improving your systems. Don't waste time on repeating time wasters when you could be doing something important instead. The fifth of my 5 options for getting more done by spending less time on unimportant things is to do the unimportant things slightly less well. To resist trying to do them perfectly and only give them the time they deserve. Some people find this very hard to do. You'll hear them say, if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well. Yes, but not perfectly. There's not enough time in life to do everything perfectly. Or to put it another way, if you do everything you do in a perfect way, you'll get very little done. Being a perfectionist will make you spend too long on things that aren't important. So you end up not having enough time for the really important things. You'll waste hours fiddling with that Excel spreadsheet and looking for the missing 10 cents, or preparing that incredibly beautiful PowerPoint presentation. Of course, if the PowerPoint presentation is for a huge conference or a key sales pitch, then it is important and you should spend hours on it. But if it's just for an internal meeting, then get the information correct, but don't worry hugely about the look of it. In your own way, if you're a perfectionist, you are strangling your own output, your own productivity. You're spending too long on a few unimportant things and therefore not getting the time for the important stuff, your health, your family, planning ahead, doing the things that you really want to do, achieving your goals for enjoy and achieve. But can a person change? Well, yes, I'm sure they can if they want to. Once you realise that this is a habit that you have and that it's costing you, then you can start to do something about it. Start by thinking about what are the things that you do too well, unnecessarily well. What are you obsessive about? And have a reason to change. What are the things that you'd like to spend more time on if you had that extra time? And then set a time limit for the things that you're doing. How long does that lawn mowing deserve out of your life? Half an hour? Okay then, that's all you're going to spend on it. And finally, tell yourself that the details aren't going to kill you. When you spot that bit that you missed, that little tuft of grass still sticking up, think, it's not going to kill me, it really doesn't matter. When that report goes over onto one more page, just by one line, don't fiddle with the font size and the line spacing and the margins to fit it in. Just leave it like it is, saying, it's not going to kill me, it really doesn't matter. And if you can't find out why is there 10 cents more in the bank than the sum total of all the invoices, just think to yourself, it really doesn't matter, it's not going to kill me. This is a battle you'll have to fight for a while, until you've broken the habit of being a perfectionist. It's probably quite ingrained, made stronger by years and years of doing it, years of treading that same path until there's a groove that you follow. But if you fight against it, you can change your habits and therefore change yourself. The tricky skill is to do the important things really well and the unimportant things only well enough. So to get started on beating perfectionism, what's the one job you're going to spend less time on today? So those are the 5 options, the only 5 options that you have if you want to get more done. Saying no, negotiating, delegating, more efficient systems, and doing some things less well. These are the only options, and they apply to every time waster. For example, if you think about meetings, you can say no to going to the meeting. You can negotiate to just go to the first part of the meeting. You can delegate and send someone else to the meeting. You can run the meeting more efficiently, or, doing it less well, you can have a Skype or phone call instead of the meeting. Or if you take interruptions, you can say no to the interruptions, perhaps put up a do not disturb notice or hide in a meeting room somewhere to do your work. You can negotiate over how long the interruption takes or when you meet with the person. You can delegate. This would mean putting up a sign saying, anyone who needs me this morning, please see Louise. You probably should check that with Louise before you do it. You could have a better system where people book appointments or maybe get to the root cause so they no longer need to interrupt you because they get better information to start with. And finally, you could do it less well and spend less time with them or refer them to something online. If it's travel, you can say no, or negotiate to go less often, or for them to come to you every other time, or delegate someone else to go, or have a better system like going on the train instead of driving, or combining trips to several customers, or do it less well and Skype them every other time. So there are 2 ways into this. Either you pick your biggest time waster, whether it's meetings or interruptions or the phone or emails or travel or whatever, and think about which of the 5 options you're going to use. Or you pick each of the 5 options and think about how you could do more of it. What can you say no to? What can you delegate, etc.? And I'd recommend you try both. But always remember that there isn't just one magic answer that you can use on everything. You need a mixture of them all. There might be one of the 5 that you're worst at, where the most improvement can be gained. But ideally, you do need to get good at all of them. And just a final thought. Most people do them in the wrong order. Most people's first reaction when a job comes in is, I'll do that myself. And then, if they're too busy, they think, I'll have to delegate that. And only if they can't do it or delegate it do they then think, I'll have to say no to that. But I'm saying, do it the other way around. your first thought should be, that's not an important task, so can I say no to it? Or negotiate at least part of it away? If not, then your second line of defence is, OK, so it has to be done, in which case, who can I give it to? Your final line of defence, which almost means you failed, should be, oh, all right then, I'll have to do it myself. If you're a manager, you've failed if you can't delegate a task to someone and you have to do it yourself. And that's quite a thought, isn't it? So now I'd like you to think about which of the 5 will you do more of? What are your main time wasters? And for each time waster, which one of my 5 choices will you use? So there we are. You now have a clear picture of what your goals are in your life, and these are the things that you want to spend more time on in order to enjoy doing them now and to feel good about achieving them in the future. And in order to get the extra time for your goals, you have my 5 options, your 5 options for getting more done. If you can get a little bit better at all of them, you'll save at least an hour per week from each one, which is at least a month per year of pure, uninterrupted time. Surely that would make a huge difference to the achievement of those goals, and therefore a huge difference to the enjoyment and achievement that you get from your life. I do hope you've enjoyed this course and that you get a chance to check out my other courses. And I'd be delighted if you want to keep in touch with me via LinkedIn. Please do message me and tell me how you've got on. And also, you might want to get my free monthly emails. If you go to the website listed here, you can add your email address, and interesting tips from me will arrive every now and then, free forever, and they'll never repeat. So until my next course, cheers for now.